A passenger plane was falling into the Pacific Ocean with no control and no hope. Military Black Hawk helicopters rushed to the scene. But when they heard a calm woman's voice on the radio giving rescue orders like a trained soldier, they stopped. They knew that voice. They knew that call sign. Shark. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a Monday. November 14, 2015. 6:38 a.m. San Diego International Airport, Lindbergh Field. The sky over San Diego looked wrong. Dark clouds had been rolling in from the Pacific since before dawn, heavy and gray, pressing down over the coast like a slow fist. Rain fell in thin, cold sheets across the terminal parking lot, drumming against car roofs and streaking down the tall glass windows of the departure hall. For Southern California in November, this kind of weather was unusual enough to feel threatening. People moved through the terminal with their collars turned up and their umbrellas folded under their arms, glancing at the wet windows with mild irritation and the tight look of people whose plans felt suddenly fragile. Inside Terminal 2, the departure boards showed minor delays. Weather-related. Nothing serious. Just enough to make the coffee lines a little longer and the conversations a little more tense. Gate 14 was already filling up. Alaska Airlines Flight 531, non-stop service to Honolulu, Hawaii. A Boeing 737-900ER, a big, reliable narrow-body workhorse configured to carry 178 passengers on this popular West Coast to Hawaii route. 5.5 hours over open Pacific Ocean. Thousands of mainlanders took this flight every year, chasing tropical sun away from the gray weight of autumn on the mainland. The gate area had its usual mix. Vacationers in bright shirts carrying duty-free bags. A family with 3 kids under 10, the youngest already crying. 2 surfers with board bags nearly as tall as they were, dragging them awkwardly through the crowd. A row of retired couples with matching luggage sets. A group of young Navy personnel in civilian clothes, heading home to Oahu on leave, laughing loudly near the windows. A businessman in a gray suit sitting stiffly with a laptop open on his knees, ignoring everything around him. Among all of them, a woman walked to the gate counter, handed over her boarding pass, and moved down the jetway with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent years learning how to move through crowded spaces without being noticed. And yet, if you had been watching carefully, which nobody was, there was something about her that made the air around her feel slightly different. She was tall, close to 5'10", with a lean and rangy build that suggested serious physical conditioning. Her skin was golden brown, warm even under the flat fluorescent lights of the terminal. Polynesian heritage was clear in her strong features, high cheekbones, a broad nose with a slight leftward bend that suggested it had been broken at least once and healed without much medical attention, and thick dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail, mostly black but streaked with a few clean lines of gray that she wore without apology. She was dressed practically. Dark gray tactical pants with cargo pockets on both thighs. A faded black long-sleeve Under Armour base layer. A lightweight waterproof Patagonia shell jacket in olive green. Merrell hiking boots, broken in and scuffed at the toes. She carried a worn canvas duffel bag with military-style nylon webbing straps slung over one shoulder, and a small hard-shell backpack on her back. She stowed both pieces of luggage in the overhead bin with practiced efficiency, one smooth motion, no fumbling, no asking for help, and dropped into seat 9A, the window seat on the starboard side, with the easy, settled movement of someone who has spent a great deal of time in aircraft seats. She pulled a thick paperback from the side pocket of her backpack and put on a pair of reading glasses, simple wireframe readers, the drugstore kind, pushing them up her nose with one finger in a gesture that seemed almost unconscious. The book was Patrick O'Brien's, Master and Commander. The spine was cracked from multiple readings. She opened it to a page somewhere in the middle third, already deep into the story, and began to read. The businessman who had taken seat 9B, the middle seat, glanced at her when she sat down, gave a quick professional assessment, tall Polynesian woman, athlete's build, looks like she does triathlons, and then shifted imperceptibly toward the aisle, giving her just a little more elbow room than he would normally have offered. He could not have explained why. There was nothing aggressive or demanding about her at all. She was simply reading. But something in the way she occupied space made him move without thinking about it. In seat 9C, the aisle seat, you had already put your earbuds in and were scrolling through your phone. You noticed her briefly when she sat down. Registered, tall, Polynesian, looks fit, maybe a CrossFit coach or an adventure tour guide, the type who does weekend trail races for fun. Then your phone pulled your attention back, and she ceased to exist for you completely. Nobody on that aircraft paid any real attention to the woman in seat 9A. Nobody had any idea that her name was Kaimana Kahale. That most people who knew her well called her Kai. That she was 42 years old. That the tattoo wrapping her left forearm, a faded tribal-style design depicting ocean waves and, if you looked closely, the unmistakable silhouette of a shark moving through them, was not decorative. That it was, in its way, a professional designation. Nobody knew that Kaimana Kahale had served in the United States Coast Guard for 22 years, from age 20 to age 42, beginning as an enlisted aviation survival technician, a rescue swimmer, at Air Station Clearwater, Florida, and eventually rising to the rank of Senior Chief Petty Officer, the highest enlisted grade achievable through merit and time. Nobody knew that she had spent the last decade of her career as lead instructor at the Coast Guard's Elite Aviation Survival Technician School in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, the program that trains every Coast Guard rescue swimmer who has graduated since 2005. Nobody knew that among the rescue swimmer community, the name Senior Chief Kahale carried a weight that was difficult to explain to civilians, the kind of weight that comes from a reputation built entirely from what a person has actually done under real conditions. And nobody knew about the call sign. Shark was not something Kai had chosen for herself. Call signs rarely are. It came from her second deployment year, when she was 22 years old and still relatively new to active duty rescue operations, flying out of Air Station Miami. A commercial fishing vessel had gone down in heavy weather 40 miles off the Florida coast. Multiple survivors in the water. During the rescue, while Kai was in the ocean managing a survivor who was panicking and nearly drowning them both, a bull shark, drawn by the blood from a gash on the survivor's leg, made a close approach. The helicopter crew watched helplessly from above. What happened next became part of Coast Guard rescue swimmer lore. Kai, without hesitation and without any weapon or tool beyond her training, physically drove the shark off. She punched it. Twice. Hard, targeted strikes to the nose, exactly as she had been taught, while simultaneously maintaining her grip on the survivor and signaling the hoist operator to bring them up. The survivor survived. The shark retreated. Kai was pulled up into the helicopter with blood on her glove from a surface abrasion on the shark's skin and a look on her face, according to the flight mechanic who told the story for years afterward, of someone who had merely dealt with a minor inconvenience. She was shark from that day forward. It stuck because it was accurate. Because in the water, Kai Kahale moved the way sharks move, with absolute economy of motion, without wasted effort, without fear, and with a complete and total commitment to the hunt. In her case, the hunt was always for the same quarry, people who were drowning, or sinking, or burning, or freezing, and who needed someone to come into the water and bring them home. 312 rescue deployments over 22 years. That was the official count in her service record. A number that put her in a small group of rescue swimmers who had served long enough and actively enough to reach 300. She had jumped from helicopters into conditions ranging from glassy calm coastal water on a summer afternoon to 40-foot swells at night in a North Atlantic storm. She had pulled sailors off capsized boats, kayakers off rocky coastlines, fishermen out of ice water, a ditched Air Force pilot out of a Louisiana bayou, a child off a sandbar in the Gulf of Mexico as the tide came in. She had broken 3 ribs in a hard hoist recovery in rough weather. She had dislocated her left shoulder during a night rescue off Cape Hatteras, popped it back in herself on the helicopter, and gone back down for the second survivor. She had won the Coast Guard Medal twice, the Distinguished Flying Cross once, and a unit commendation that her commanding officer described in his remarks as the most important rescue operation this air station has conducted in 15 years. 3 months ago, all of that had ended. The knee injury was the result of a hard landing during a boat rescue in rough seas off the coast of Maine. She had come down wrong on a tilting deck, and the ACL and MCL in her right knee had torn so severely that even after surgery and months of intensive physical therapy, she had recovered only about 70% of full function. 70% was enough for civilian life. It was not enough for active Coast Guard duty, which required peak physical conditioning and the ability to perform in extreme conditions with no margin for impairment. She had been medically separated from active duty on August 14, 2015, at a ceremony in Elizabeth City where several dozen of her former students had showed up in dress uniform to stand at attention while her commanding officer read her service record aloud. She had shaken hands, accepted her folded flag, and driven home to the apartment she was renting while she figured out what came next. She had not cried at the ceremony. She cried once, 2 weeks later, sitting alone at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, reading a news story about a rescue swimmer who had pulled a family off a sinking sailboat in a storm off Cape Hatteras. She had read the story 3 times. Then she had put her phone down and stared at the wall for a long time. Now she was on this flight because her grandmother had died in September. Male Kahale, 81 years old, who had taken in a 12-year-old girl after the girl's parents were killed in a car accident on the H-1 freeway on Oahu, and raised her with firm love and the deeply held belief that the ocean was not something to be feared but something to be given respect and, when necessary, obedience. Her grandmother had always said, "When I die, give me back to the ocean where our family came from. Take me to the water off Waikiki and let me go." The urn was in Kai's hard-shell backpack, packed in bubble wrap, secured with foam. She was going home to Honolulu to do the last thing her grandmother had asked of her. She was not supposed to be a hero today. She was supposed to be a grieving retired veteran reading Patrick O'Brien and trying to feel something other than lost. Alaska Airlines Flight 531 pushed back from Gate 14 at 7:11 a.m., 8 minutes behind schedule due to the weather. Captain Olivia Reyes taxied them out to runway 27 and held short while a Southwest 737 landed in the rain. Captain Reyes was 38 years old, with 14 years at Alaska Airlines and 16,000 total flight hours. She was considered, by her peers and by airline management, to be one of the steadiest and most reliable captains on the Pacific routes. Her first officer, Kevin Wu, was 31, with 7,400 hours and a background flying C-17 Globemaster cargo aircraft for the Air Force before transitioning to commercial aviation. They had flown together twice before. They worked well together. At 7:23 a.m., Flight 531 lifted off runway 27 into the gray San Diego sky, banked left over the Pacific, and began its climb toward cruising altitude. For the first hour and 45 minutes, the flight was completely routine. Kai read her book. The businessman in 9B worked on a spreadsheet. Somewhere behind them, one of the small children had finally stopped crying and was now watching something on an iPad with headphones on. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with drinks and snack packages. The sky outside Kai's window was a deep, flat blue at altitude, the clouds far below, the ocean invisible under the overcast. She had flown over the Pacific dozens of times during her Coast Guard career, always in helicopters or fixed-wing search aircraft, never at this altitude. At 38,000 feet, the ocean below did not seem real. It seemed like a concept. At 8:47 a.m. Pacific time, the aircraft was at 28,000 feet, approximately 380 miles west of the California coast. Nothing but deep Pacific Ocean in every direction. The nearest land was behind them. The nearest land ahead of them was Hawaii, still more than 4 hours away. In the cockpit, a warning light came on. It was a hydraulic system pressure warning, System A, the primary system. Captain Reyes looked at it with the focused attention of a pilot who takes all warnings seriously, even the ones that turn out to be nothing. She and Wu ran the checklist. The pressure was dropping, not slowly but fast, the gauge needle swinging down in a way that did not look like a sensor fault or a minor leak. It looked like a rupture. "Hydraulic system A," Wu said quietly. "Running the checklist," Reyes said. 60 seconds later, a second warning light came on. "Hydraulic system B." For a moment, both pilots stared at the panel. What they were seeing was not supposed to be possible. The Boeing 737 has two independent hydraulic systems precisely because the probability of both failing simultaneously is considered so remote that it has been categorized as essentially impossible under normal operating conditions. The system had been designed with this redundancy as a fundamental safety principle. Both systems failing at the same moment was the kind of event that existed in engineering risk assessments as a theoretical outlier so far beyond the practical probability curve that it was listed not as a scenario to train for but as a scenario that defined the outer boundary of what could be imagined. It was happening. A microscopic crack in the hydraulic pump, the result of a manufacturing defect that had escaped quality control during production 3 years earlier, a hairline flaw in a component that had been under cyclic stress for thousands of flight hours, had finally propagated to failure under the pressure load of the climb. When the pump seized, the pressure spike had traveled through the hydraulic lines with enough force to rupture a weakened junction in the backup system simultaneously. The probability of this specific sequence of events was, according to the subsequent accident investigation report, approximately 1 in 800 million flight hours. It was happening to Flight 531 at 8:47 a.m. on a Monday morning over the Pacific Ocean with 178 people on board. "Controls are not responding," Wu said. His voice was level, but Reyes could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "She tried the ailerons. Nothing. The rudder. Nothing. The elevators." A faint, sluggish response. The aircraft could still be influenced through differential engine thrust, but it was like trying to steer a car with no steering wheel by shifting your weight. It was possible. It was not precise. And they were at 28,000 feet, losing altitude gradually, 380 miles from land, with no hydraulics, no flaps, no landing gear, and no ability to configure for a landing on any surface. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Reyes said into the radio. "Los Angeles Center, this is Alaska 531, we have complete dual hydraulic failure, no flight controls, we are over the Pacific approximately 380 miles west of San Diego, we cannot reach any airport, we are going to have to ditch." "Mayday, mayday, mayday." The response from LA Center was immediate. They were vectored out of all traffic. Coast Guard District 11 in Alameda was notified. Emergency assets were put on standby. All of this happened in a space of 90 seconds, with the professional efficiency of systems that train constantly for emergencies that almost never come. Reyes ran the calculations. With limited control authority through differential thrust, she could manage a very rough descent. She could attempt to level the wings as much as possible. She could try to control the rate of descent. What she could not do was make any of this precise. She could not configure for a low-speed approach. She could not deploy flaps. She could not slow the aircraft to anything approaching safe ditching speed. The impact was going to be hard. The question was how hard, and whether the airframe would survive intact long enough for 178 people to get out of it. She had never trained for ocean ditching. Commercial pilots rarely do. The scenarios covered in type training focus on engine failures, pressurization emergencies, fire suppression, runway excursions, practical emergencies with meaningful probability. Ocean ditching is treated as so rare that it receives only cursory attention. She knew the theory. She had never practiced it. "Approximately 11 minutes, Wu said. Reyes picked up the PA handset. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this is Captain Reyes. I need your complete attention. We have experienced complete failure of both hydraulic systems. This has left us with minimal ability to control the aircraft. We have attempted all emergency procedures and we cannot restore control. We are going to have to land this aircraft on the surface of the Pacific Ocean. This is called a water ditching. We have approximately 10 minutes. Flight attendants, begin preparing the cabin immediately for emergency water landing. Passengers, you must follow all instructions from your flight attendants precisely. Put on your life vests now, do not inflate them yet. Brace position instructions are on your safety card. I want you to know that we will do everything in our power to give you a survivable landing. I am not going to mislead you about what is happening. Please listen to your flight attendants. Please remain as calm as you can. We are working. She set the PA handset down. The cabin erupted. Not into screaming, exactly, it was more complex than that. The sound was layered. A sharp collective gasp from half the cabin simultaneously. Then crying, from several locations at once, including the children. A man near the back shouted something that was probably profanity. Phones appeared everywhere as people began calling loved ones, typing frantic texts, recording video with shaking hands. The flight attendants moved immediately into their emergency roles, voices raised and urgent, shouting instructions about life vests and brace positions and the locations of emergency exits. In seat 9A, Kaimana Kahale closed her Patrick O'Brian novel. She folded the cover carefully, as if she intended to come back to it, and tucked it into the seat pocket in front of her. She took off her reading glasses and put them in the breast pocket of her jacket. She sat very still for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds something happened in her that she had not felt in 3 months, a shift, like a gear engaging, like something that had been idling quietly under the surface of her civilian life suddenly receiving fuel and power and purpose. She stood up. Around her, people were fumbling with life vest packages, reading instructions with trembling hands, crying into phones. The businessman in 9B was ashen, his laptop still open on his tray table, completely forgotten. Nobody stood up with the kind of deliberate, unhurried confidence that Kai stood up with. She moved forward through the cabin toward the front galley. Flight attendant Jennifer Torres, 44 years old with 19 years at Alaska Airlines, was at the forward station, arms full of life vest demonstrations and emergency briefing cards, trying to remember the water ditching procedure she had been trained on once, 15 years ago, in a recurrent certification course she had not thought about since. Her hands were steady but her face was pale. Kai stepped in front of her. "My name is Kaimana Kahale," she said. Her voice was low and clear and completely calm. Not performed calm, actual calm, the kind that comes from having been in genuine emergencies so many times that the emergency response has become as natural as breathing. "I'm retired United States Coast Guard. Senior Chief Petty Officer. Aviation Survival Technician, Rescue Swimmer, 22 years of service. 312 rescue deployments. I have trained extensively on water ditching procedures and ocean survival. I have supervised hundreds of maritime rescues. I know what happens to an aircraft when it hits water, and I know how to keep people alive after impact. If this aircraft is going into the Pacific Ocean, I can help you prepare these people. Let me help you." Jennifer Torres looked at her for exactly 1 second. She was a woman who had spent 19 years learning to read passengers, who needed more help, who was about to become a problem, who could be trusted in a difficult moment. In that 1 second, everything about Kaimana Kahale communicated the same thing: she was real, she was trained, and she was exactly what this situation required. "Yes," Jennifer said. "Please." What happened in the next 8 minutes was something that several of the 178 passengers on Flight 531 would later describe, in interviews and testimony and in their own private accounts of the worst morning of their lives, as the thing that saved them. Not the ditching itself. Not the helicopters that came afterward. The 8 minutes before impact when a tall woman with a shark tattoo on her forearm walked through the cabin and turned 178 terrified people into something that functioned, barely, like a survival team. Kai moved through the aisle with the unhurried purposefulness of someone who has worked in controlled chaos for 2 decades. She spoke loudly and clearly, pitching her voice to carry without shouting, using the tone she had used for years in classrooms and on pitching helicopter decks and in cold water with someone panicking in her arms. "Life vests on, do not inflate them. You inflate outside only. Inflating inside will trap you when the cabin floods. Life vest on, do not pull that cord yet. Brace position, feet flat on the floor, both hands over your head, chin down. When I tell you to brace, you brace, and you stay in brace until the aircraft stops moving. After impact, you wait for my signal before you move toward exits. The cabin will fill with water, you will have 90 seconds before it becomes difficult to exit. Follow the exit crew directly. Do not push. Do not panic swim. Group up, stay together, stay near the aircraft. She identified the strongest-looking passengers, the Navy personnel, a man who looked like he worked construction, one of the surfers, and spoke to each of them directly, briefly, clearly. You're helping others out of the exits after impact. You stay near the rear doors. You, front left exit. You, front right. You pull people out and into the water, then you stay with the group. They nodded. The Navy kids looked almost relieved to be given a task. She crouched beside the row where the family with 3 small children was sitting. The parents were holding the children tightly, the mother crying without sound, the father's jaw locked tight. Your children are going to be fine, Kai said quietly, looking directly at the mother. I need you to listen to me. After impact, you hand each child to one of the people near you, I'll tell you who, and then you get out first so you can receive them from outside. Okay. You go first, they come after. That's how we do it. That's how all 3 of your children get out safely. The mother looked at her and breathed and nodded. She made her way to the cockpit door and knocked. Jennifer Torres opened it. Captain, Kai said, stepping into the doorway, I'm the retired Coast Guard I mentioned. Rescue swimmer. I need 30 seconds. Reyes glanced back at her. She and Wu were fighting the aircraft, managing thrust differentials, fighting to keep the wings as level as possible, struggling for every degree of control authority the plane had left. Her face was absolutely focused, every muscle in it directed at the instruments and at the ocean she could see beginning to appear below through breaks in the cloud layer. But she looked at Kai and she listened. After impact, Kai said, cut all electrical power immediately, no fire risk in the water. The aircraft will stay afloat for 60 to 90 seconds in this swell condition, probably not longer. I'll coordinate passenger evacuation from the cabin, using your flight attendants. Try to bring it in nose up, belly first, as shallow as you can manage. If you can reduce speed as much as possible through engine control before impact, do it. Any reduction helps. We can do this, Captain. Your job is to give us a survivable impact. My job is to keep them alive after that. We'll do our jobs. Reyes held her eye for 2 seconds. Thank you, she said. We will do our best. I know you will, Kai said. She stepped back. Jennifer closed the cockpit door. In the cockpit, Reyes said quietly, to no one in particular, where did she come from? Wu, still working the thrust levers with both hands, said, Seat 9A. They had approximately 6 minutes. 300 miles to the east and slightly north, 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters from the California Air National Guard's 129th Rescue Wing were completing a maritime training exercise over the Pacific. The 129th was one of the Air National Guard's dedicated combat search and rescue units, equipped and trained for exactly the kind of mission that was now unfolding. They had heard the initial Mayday call. Major David Hopper Patterson, 39 years old, 17 years in the Army and Air National Guard, 2,800 flight hours and a combat tour in Iraq behind him, had immediately turned his flight toward the reported coordinates and pushed his aircraft toward maximum speed. His wingman followed. On the radio, he could hear the cockpit crew of Flight 531 working the emergency. And in the background, sometimes clearer, sometimes fading, he could hear a woman's voice. Calm, precise, using terminology that sounded deeply familiar. The way she phrased things. The cadence of the instructions she was giving. The specific procedural details about exit sequencing and life vest inflation and post-impact grouping. That's Coast Guard, his flight mechanic said from the back. Patterson keyed the radio. Alaska 531, this is Rescue 7, flight of 2 Black Hawks, we are inbound to your ditching coordinates, estimating 22 minutes, we are equipped for water rescue. I want to ask, whoever is coordinating evacuation procedures in that cabin, you sound like Coast Guard. Please identify yourself for rescue coordination purposes. There was a brief pause. Then a woman's voice came on the radio, and it was steadier than anything Patterson had heard on any emergency frequency in 17 years of flying. Rescue 7, this is Senior Chief Kaimana Kahale, United States Coast Guard, retired. Call sign Shark. I am currently a passenger aboard Alaska 531. I am coordinating ditching survival procedures in the cabin. We have 178 souls on board. Estimated time to impact is approximately 6 minutes. I am requesting you coordinate with Coast Guard District 11 for maximum rescue asset deployment. We will need multiple aircraft. I will have survivors organized and grouped post-impact. Recommend you approach from the southeast for best swell angle on your hoists. Dead silence on the frequency. 2 seconds of it. Then Patterson's voice, and there was something in it, not unprofessional, but unmistakably human, the sound of a pilot who has heard something that changes the calculation of what is possible. Shark. The Shark. Senior Chief Kahale from AST School. Ma'am, Alaska 531, you have on board one of the most experienced ocean survival instructors the Coast Guard has ever produced. Senior Chief, we are pushing hard, we will be at your location as fast as these aircraft can get there. Coast Guard District 11 has already launched, HH-60 Jayhawks out of Air Station San Diego and Los Angeles, they are inbound. You will have rescue assets overhead within 22 to 25 minutes of impact. Your job is to keep those people alive until we get there. You have trained hundreds of swimmers how to do exactly that. Now you're teaching the whole class at once. We are coming. You keep them alive. Rescue 7, out. In the cabin of Flight 531, several people who heard that transmission on the overhead speakers, Jennifer Torres had put the radio on cabin audio so Kai could communicate with the cockpit while working the cabin, would later say that those words changed something. Not that they stopped being afraid. They were all still terrified. But something settled. Something organized. Because if the helicopters were coming, and if the woman with the shark tattoo knew what she was doing, and she clearly did, then there was a chance. A real chance. And a chance was enough to hold on to. Kai did not let herself feel the transmission. There was no time. She moved back through the cabin, checking positions, checking that every life vest was correctly fitted, repositioning the family with the small children, speaking quietly to the elderly couple across the aisle who were holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white, telling them exactly what to do and in what order. She checked the emergency exit rows, confirmed the Navy personnel understood their assignments. She looked out the window. The ocean was very close now. Everyone brace, she called out, her voice filling the cabin with the command authority of someone who has been giving orders in crisis conditions for 2 decades. Feet flat. Hands over your heads. Chin down. Brace. 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 In the cockpit, Captain Olivia Reyes and First Officer Kevin Wu were doing something that has only been successfully accomplished a handful of times in commercial aviation history. They were using differential engine thrust, varying the power between the left and right engines to create asymmetric thrust that could influence the aircraft's heading and roll, to guide a 174,000-pound aircraft with no flight controls toward a controlled impact on the surface of the open Pacific Ocean. It was not flying. It was something closer to falling with intent. Reyes had the nose up as much as she could manage. She had reduced engine power to near idle to slow their approach speed. She was aimed at a trough between 2 swells, the flattest water she could find in the 6-foot swell that was running under them. The surface was coming up fast. Brace, she said, quietly, to Kevin Wu. "Brace," he confirmed. Alaska Airlines Flight 531 hit the Pacific Ocean at 9:03 a.m. at a speed of approximately 162 knots, at a nose-up angle of roughly 4 degrees, belly first. The impact was violent. Later investigations would estimate the G-force at initial contact at approximately 4.2 g, enough to bruise ribs and knock the wind from every person on board, enough to shatter the overhead bins on the port side and send luggage cascading into the aisle. The nose gear bay collapsed upward. The forward fuselage buckled slightly but held. The aircraft skipped once, a brief, sickening moment of lift, then came back down and skidded for approximately 300 meters across the surface, the ocean tearing at the belly and the wing roots, before coming to rest. Then it was quiet, for about 3 seconds. Then the ocean began coming in. "Go!" Kai called. "Exits. Now. Do not inflate vests inside, G.O." What followed was controlled chaos. The forward left door blew open and the evacuation slide deployed, inflating into a bright orange ramp that dropped into the gray Pacific swell. The forward right door, jammed by the impact, required 2 of the Navy personnel to hit it together with their shoulders before it gave way. The rear exits opened. Kai was at the forward left door, physically lifting a child and passing her to the flight attendant on the slide, turning back for another. She was operating entirely on training, on the muscle memory of 2 decades of telling people what to do in the water and having them do it. Inflate your vest when you're in the water. Inflate when you're clear of the aircraft. Stay together. Get away from the aircraft but stay together. The aircraft held together for 87 seconds before the water level inside the cabin reached the forward exit floor. In that 87 seconds, 178 people evacuated a Boeing 737 that was actively sinking into the Pacific Ocean. Kai was the last person out of the forward door. She went out feet first, dropped 4 feet into 59-degree water that hit her like a physical shock, came up gasping and already moving. She inflated her vest, oriented herself, and looked around. Survivors were everywhere in the water, clustered in rough groups near the slowly submerging aircraft. 3 of the 4 evacuation slide rafts had inflated correctly and were floating nearby. 1 had deployed partially and was barely usable. People were in the water between the rafts, some calm, some panicking, some already starting to swim away from the group, the worst thing they could do. "Stay together." Kai called, loud as she could, filling her lungs and projecting. "Do not swim away from the group. Conserve your energy. Come to the rafts. I need the strong swimmers helping others, come to me." The Navy personnel were already doing it, pulling people toward the rafts, keeping heads above water, doing exactly what she had told them. The construction worker was hauling an elderly man toward the nearest raft by the collar of his life vest. The surfer, completely calm in the water in a way that only makes sense for someone who has spent years paddling in cold ocean swells, was swimming from person to person checking on them. Kai deployed sea anchors from 2 of the rafts using the equipment stowed in the raft packs, bright orange fabric drogues that drag in the water and prevent the rafts from drifting apart in the swell. It was a technique she had taught in the classroom 100 times. It worked exactly as it was supposed to work. The raft stabilized. She organized the survivors in the water into a defensive circle around the rafts, the strongest in the outer ring, the weakest and the children loaded into the rafts first. She kept moving. Kept talking. Kept counting heads. The water was 59 degrees. In 59-degree water, hypothermia becomes a serious risk after approximately 30 to 45 minutes for most adults. She knew this. She did not share this particular calculation with the people around her. The first Black Hawk arrived at 9:21 a.m., 18 minutes after impact. Major Patterson had pushed his engines past their rated limits for the final 50 miles. The aircraft came in low and fast, banked hard, and set up for hoist operations, its rescue swimmer already rigged and ready in the door. Petty Officer Carlos Mendez, 26 years old, 3 years out of AST school, dropped from the helicopter into the water 30 yards from the main group. He surfaced, cleared his mask, oriented himself, and stopped. He was looking at Senior Chief Kaimana Kahale. In the water. In the middle of a rescue operation she had apparently organized from inside a commercial aircraft that was now mostly underwater behind her. "Senior Chief," he called out, swimming toward her. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be retired," Kai said, already loading an elderly woman into the rescue basket that was coming down on the hoist cable. "Bad knee. This is my last rescue. Help me get these people out of the water, Mendez." Carlos Mendez had graduated from AST school 3 years ago under Senior Chief Kahale's instruction. He had heard the story of the bull shark in Florida approximately 15 times during training. He had been told, by Kai and by every other instructor at the school, that rescue swimmers do not stop until the job is done. He closed his mouth, nodded once, and got to work. A second Black Hawk arrived 8 minutes later. Then, at 9:36 a.m., the first Coast Guard HH-60 Jayhawk arrived from Air Station San Diego, followed 7 minutes after that by a second one from Los Angeles. 6 aircraft total, rotating through the rescue operation in coordinated cycles, lowering and raising rescue baskets and rescue swimmers, pulling survivors from the swell 1 and 2 at a time, lifting them to safety. Kai remained in the water until the final survivor was loaded into a rescue basket. She had been in 59-degree water for 41 minutes. She was hypothermic. Her core temperature, when measured later at the hospital, was 95.1 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees below normal but not yet in the dangerous range. She was helped into a rescue basket by Carlos Mendez, who had to argue with her about it because she kept gesturing toward other people in the water who she thought still needed to be checked. "Senior Chief," he said. "You are the last one. Get in the basket." She got in the basket. When they pulled her up into the Jayhawk, the flight mechanic wrapped her in a survival blanket and handed her a heat pack. She sat against the bulkhead and shook, not from fear but from cold, and looked out the open door at the patch of ocean where Alaska Airlines Flight 531 had been. The aircraft was gone. There was nothing visible except swells and a thin scatter of debris and the bright orange of life vests still in the water. And helicopters. 6 of them, working the area in overlapping circuits, bringing people home. The official report from Coast Guard District 11, published 4 months later, concluded, the survival rate in the ditching of Alaska Airlines Flight 531, 100%, with 0 fatalities among 178 passengers and crew, is without precedent in the recorded history of commercial aviation water ditching events. While the skilled performance of the flight crew in achieving a survivable impact angle and the rapid response of rescue assets were essential contributing factors, the investigation concludes that the primary factor enabling 0 fatalities was the organized, knowledgeable, and sustained survival coordination performed by retired Senior Chief Petty Officer Kaimana Kahale in the period from notification to impact and throughout the post-impact survival phase. Senior Chief Kahale's actions are consistent with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer Program. Captain Olivia Reyes suffered 2 cracked ribs and a laceration on her forehead from the instrument panel. Kevin Wu had a dislocated shoulder and a concussion. All 176 passengers survived, with injuries ranging from bruises and cuts to 3 broken arms and 1 broken collarbone, a young child who had not been properly braced. Nobody drowned. Nobody was lost. Nobody died. Kai spent 3 days in a San Diego hospital being treated for hypothermia and a minor knee aggravation. She had not been gentle with the bad knee during the evacuation. She discharged herself on the 3rd day, before the hospital wanted her to leave, because she needed to be somewhere. She took a taxi to the harbor. She walked out to the end of the dock where the harbor was open to the bay, with the bay open to the Pacific beyond it. She took the urn out of her bag, and she opened it, and she gave her grandmother back to the water. She stood there for a long time after. The reporters found her the next day. They always do. She spoke to them once, briefly, outside the hospital, because she owed the people who had been on that flight at least one statement about what had happened. "How did you stay so calm?" one of them asked. Kai looked at the shark tattoo on her left forearm. The waves and the silhouette moving through them, faded now with years but still clear. "I've been jumping into the ocean to save people for 22 years, she said. "That's what rescue swimmers do. We go into situations that terrify normal people, and we bring them home. Today I just did it without a helicopter. That's all. Everyone else did the real work. The pilots landed that aircraft in survivable condition, the passengers followed instructions, the rescue crews executed perfectly. I helped organize. That's what senior chiefs do. We organize chaos into mission success." A week later, she received a phone call from the Master Chief of the Coast Guard's Aviation Survival Technician Program. They wanted her back. Not as an active rescue swimmer, her knee would not allow that, and she understood it. But as chief instructor at AST School in Elizabeth City. Shore-based. Teaching. No physical requirements beyond what she could already do. The program was hers to shape, the curriculum hers to build, the next generation of rescue swimmers hers to train. She said yes before he finished the sentence. When the paperwork was complete, when her orders were cut and her return to active duty was official, she sat at her kitchen table, the same one where she had cried alone at 2 a.m. 3 months earlier, reading about someone else's rescue, and she looked at the shark tattoo on her forearm for a long time. She thought about the 178 people who were alive today. She thought about her grandmother's ashes, given back to the ocean. She thought about Carlos Mendez in the water, doing exactly what she had trained him to do. She thought about the moment on the radio when Patterson had said her call sign and the transmission had changed something in that cabin full of terrified people. She thought about what it means to be a rescue swimmer. Not the adrenaline of the jump, not the physical peak of the deployment, not any of the things that she had worried, in those dark months after retirement, that she would never feel again. The thing underneath all of that. The thing that had made her stand up in seat 9A when everyone around her was sitting down. She picked up her phone and texted her old commanding officer at Elizabeth City, reporting as ordered. "Tell the students shark's coming back." Then she put the phone down and opened her Patrick O'Brian novel to the place she had left it. Sharks don't stop swimming. That's how they stay alive. She hadn't stopped swimming. She had just changed, for a little while, how she hunted. And now she was going back to the water where she belonged, not to jump from helicopters, but to build the swimmers who would. To give the ocean more people like Mendez. More people who would go in without hesitation, who would punch the shark and bring the survivor up, who would be shark in their own way, in their own waters, for their own 20 years. She read until the light outside her window turned gold and then faded, and the Pacific, invisible over the rooftops to the west, moved on without her, for now.